So the speaker is Sally E. from Buena Park, California.
Hi, my name is Sally, and I'm an addict. And I want to thank everybody for coming and helping me to celebrate my birthday tonight. I really want to thank the convention committee who put this thing on, because I have never been at a convention that had this many newcomers present, and it's really, really super to see that. It's really neat. You know, in California, usually we'll have a few newcomers at conventions, and I don't know what you do with your newcomers, but they're not scared to go to conventions, and they seem to be in California. I don't know. I want to thank the guy. I really want to thank them for putting this on, because it's just really super. I also want to thank the people that came to pick me up at the airport. They sent 2, and I really only needed 1. I didn't have that much luggage. And the guy, Bob G., picked me up at the airport. And if I had any doubts about the fact that he was a drug addict, by the time we got here at the desk, I had none whatsoever. I had made reservations, and he had made reservations for me also, and so there were 2 of them, and the hotel had no room because they didn't have a record of either one of them. And he sort of argued with them, and we argued with them, and we got the guy's supervisor and argued with him, and then that guy's supervisor. And by this time, I would have settled for a broom closet, and they gave me a room. They said, well, we can give her a room. And Bob said she wants one with an ocean view. I mean, smoke was coming out of that guy's ears. You know, I really need to tell you that I am scared to death. My knees are knocking, and I feel like I might be having a heart attack any minute. But that's okay. I'm...
Friends are out there. I know you have those.
Where's Charles? You need to holler, "C'est la vie, motherfucker." I spoke in Ohio, and I was pissing and moaning about something there, and it wasn't that I was scared. I don't remember what it was, and some little pipsqueak stood up and hollered, "C'est la vie, motherfucker." So anyway, really, all I've got to tell you tonight is what it was like, what happened, and what it's like for me today. And I'm going to talk about that. I grew up in a family that was really normal, except for me. And nobody used drugs, and nobody drank, and there was no alcoholism in my family. And I used to really envy people that had terrible backgrounds, because I used to really think that there was an excuse for them, and there was no excuse for me. And I don't think at any point in time, you know, I made any kind of a decision like when I was growing up, like, gee, when I grow up, I really want to be a drug addict. I really want to be an alcoholic, because they lead such neat lives and go such wonderful places and do such fantastic things. And it was a Catholic family, a relatively large Catholic family, and I went to Catholic schools, and I went to a Catholic all-girls school. And the first time that I ever had any chemical, we used to have these 3-day religious retreats where you prayed and meditated for 3 days. And I used to get really bored. And the first day I would try to do it because I always tried to comply. And the second day I would read dirty books. And in my senior year in high school, on the 3rd day, I broke into the chem lab and brewed up my own alcoholic concoction and threw up on the feet of Jesus. And my mother had to come down to school. And I learned how to lie really, really early. I learned how to go through the motions, and I learned how to tell you what I thought that you wanted to hear, and then go around the corner and do what I wanted to do. And so I told my mother when she confronted me with it that nobody in the family drank, and you know I wouldn't do a thing like that. And of course, I don't know why they're saying that none doesn't like me, you know, that sort of thing. And she believed me, and she went down and fought with the sister. And they called in my father to moderate, and he wasn't too sure. And it ended up that they didn't throw me out, and they kept me. And I found out something about that very first taste of alcohol that I really liked it. When I was under the influence of some sort of chemical, I wasn't too tall, too skinny, funny looking, and real dull. I was witty and charming and cute and pretty. And so I really, really liked it. And when I graduated from high school, I went to college because that's what you were supposed to do in my family. And I got into chemicals very, very early. I got into chemicals really early in my college career. And I didn't have a very long college career, I'm here to tell you. They asked me to leave at the end of the first semester. And I was sent to another school, and that process repeated itself. And I decided that going to school was not my forte, so to speak. But I didn't know about earning a living, and I didn't know what to do. So I went out and got a job, and I got fired from 3 or 4 jobs in rapid succession because you can't use a lot of chemicals and work real good. You know, you kind of forget to be there sometimes. And so I began looking for solutions on things on the outside to put on the inside to make me okay. And I decided that since I couldn't go to school, that I probably needed to get married, and that would fix me. And so I found a nice, normal guy, and we got married, and everything was not wonderful. He really didn't appreciate my chemical dependency, and I ended up leaving him. And then I moved back to LA and worked some more and got fired some more. And I had a job one time working on a switchboard, and I knotted down on the cord and it got in my mouth. Oh, I don't know if anybody's ever done that, but my teeth hurt for 3 days. I thought I was going to have to go to the dentist and have them all pulled. You know, I had visions of it destroyed the root, and they were rotting away up there, and it was really pretty nasty. And I kicked around back and forth. I did a lot of geographics. I moved to Seattle. I moved to San Francisco. And I moved to San Francisco from Los Angeles to get out of the drug scene. Oh. And my intentions were good, folks, believe me. I really intended to stay clean. Of course, San Francisco, you know how it goes. And I had a really, really bad year in San Francisco. I mean, I really, really got sick, and I think it was the first time I really got physically ill from my addiction. And I ended up in the hospital with IVs and transfusions and things. And the day that I got out of the hospital, I got drunk and I got loaded, and I was back in the next day. And I decided that wasn't cutting it. And I wrote my family one of these pleading letters like, you know, if you'll send me back to school, I'll really do it, I promise. And I had some little college picked out in this little town in Arizona. And it was like the early 60s, and I figured there couldn't possibly be any drugs there. The big major was forestry. And I picked it out because I knew that I could stay away from chemicals in that town. And they did. I need that. Thank you. Anyway, I picked it out because I knew that I could stay away from chemicals in that town. And there were only 3 people in that town that used, and it took me 2 weeks to find all 3 of them. And I was asked to leave again. And I moved to Orange County, and something happened to me at that particular time. I fell in love. I mean, really fell in love. And I fell in love with a guy that had just gotten out of the pen after doing a flat 13. Believe it or not, this dude didn't have a drug problem. He had a hostility problem. did not use drugs and did not drink, but had a hostility problem. And we tied up, and he told me that if I was going to be with him, I was going to stay clean because he couldn't afford, he had a lifetime parole, and he couldn't afford a doper broad. And so I cleaned up, but I drank. No, but I really, and this dude used to bug me about my drinking. And I really felt good because I really felt like I had things under control. I really wasn't drinking that much, in my opinion. It was less than at any time before. And I enrolled in an LVN program and got an LVN license. And just the time I finished the LVN program, this guy got snatched up for some hostility things. And they sent him back to the joint. And I remember going down to Orange County Jail before they transferred him to San Quentin and telling him, you know what, man, I really love you, and I'll wait for you, and I'll write to you, and I'll be there when you get out. And I really believed it. I had the best intentions in the world. I really intended to do that. The only problem was 3 weeks later I was loaded, and I never did write. And now I've got this LVN license, and I got this job in the hospital, and I'm using. And I really, at that time, the next 2 years, I had a 2-year run. And the next 2 years were, I mean, I had more drugs than I could possibly use. I used to get paid from that job, and I'd go to Mexico. I stole script pads from the doctors in the hospital and hit every pharmacy in Mexico with these script pads. And then I stole from the drug cabinet, and I scored on the streets. And I had a meth, phenobarb, Ritalin, and Secondol habit going. Plus, I was dropping acid and smoking weed and whatever else I could get my hands on. No, I never said no to anything. Anything that anybody had, I would use. And I can remember one time when I was in school, somebody telling me that Asmodor was a good high. And I said, bring it on. And I don't know what happened, but the cops picked me up out in front of the Snowflake Laundry in Flagstaff, Arizona, and it was snowing, and I had a pair of shorts and a T-shirt on. But anyway, so I'm working in this hospital, and I feel pretty good about having this halfway decent job, and I feel pretty good about all the drugs that I have, and I feel pretty secure. And then things started to go bad. My mind wouldn't work quite as good as it had. You know, I would start to count when I took a pulse, and I'd lose track after about 20. And then it got worse, and I couldn't read a thermometer. So I used to look at the charts and put down whatever it was the last person wrote on it, plus or minus 1 or 2. And I'd be so loaded sometimes pushing that med cart down the hall, you know, just falling over it. And I can remember one time we had this kid that was on a stimulant for a heart condition. I mean, I hadn't even taken any pills that night. And I was passing out these pills, and all of a sudden I went to give this kid these pills, and the face didn't look quite right to me. And I looked, and I had given the kid that was on a stimulant for a heart condition a real heavy tranquilizer. And I mean, I thought I was going to die. I was really, really scared. I was scared that they'd find out all the stuff, all the records that I had juggled. I was just really, really, and I was scared the kid was going to die. But I didn't tell anybody. And I kept running out every 5 minutes looking at the kid to see if he was still breathing. And finally, I found somebody on another unit that had a white, and I cut it in half. And I went back and I gave this kid half a white. And I go home that night and I go, please, God, don't let, you know, you ever did that? Please, God, get me out of this and I'll never do it again. Oh, please, God, don't let that kid die. Oh, please, God, don't let that kid die. And I came in the next day. And like when somebody died, there was an empty bed, and I couldn't turn around and look at that bed. I kind of looked over out of the corner of my eye to see if there was somebody still there, and he didn't die. So I continued to use and I continued to drink, and things continued to get worse. And my functioning, my ability to even communicate went downhill. And I finally got busted. I came back on a run from Mexico, and I had brought back a lot of stuff, and it was all for my own personal use, and I got busted the next day. And I had never made the jails before, and I was sitting in county jail, and it was the pits. You know, and I kept thinking, like, what's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this? You know, I was looking around at the other people in there. And I got bailed out, and I was still pending. I was pending on that one, and I got popped again. And then they started a big drug investigation in the hospital that I worked in. And they pulled me off medications. And it was a state job, and in California it takes a long time for them to fire you from a state job. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I lost this job, because I knew that I'd probably never find another one. And so I'd come in every day, and the charge nurse, and I was up before board hearings and all this, that, and the other thing. And every day I'd come in, and the charge nurse would look at me and say, "Haven't they fired you yet?" I mean, it felt real good. And I did get fired from that job. And I went to live with the hippies because I was unemployed and unemployable. I had become totally unemployable. I started to see things that weren't there. I started to hear things that weren't there. I started having perceptual problems. I started having all kinds of problems, and I started making county jail like a revolving door. You know, it was, and I never had a lot of nerve. You know, I wasn't very hard or very tough, and so what I made county jail for were little chicken shit possessions and petty thefts, and once in a while a bad check if I could find someone stupid enough to take it, which wasn't very often. And then I started making the nut houses, and I can remember a couple of times going to Psycho, and one time I don't even remember how I got there. But by this time, like, I couldn't even remember. I mean, this guy was interviewing me, and he asked me what my name was, and I couldn't remember it. And I mean, I got really panicky, and I started thinking about real common chick names. No, it's not Janice. No, it's not Barbara. And this dude is still looking at me, you know. And I'm running all these names through my head, and finally I remembered, and I went, "It's Sally." You know? Like, thank God. And he said, "What's your last name?" And I told him, "Fuck you, you got it on that piece of paper, and I ain't playing this game." And now I got some court cases pending, and I'm living up in Laguna Canyon off a dirt road, off a dirt road, off a dirt road, with the hippies in a house that had a dirt floor, and they had an acid factory in the back, and I used to cap it for them, and they'd say, "For God's sakes, whatever you do, don't lick your fingers, you've had enough." And I lived up there for quite a while, and one bunch would throw me out, and somebody else would take me in for a while, and then they'd get tired of me and throw me out. And I used to have a nickname. People used to call me Veggie for Vegetable. When I was living with the red freaks, they used to say, "Look what that goddamn speed does to you." When I was living with the speed freaks, they used to say, "Look what that goddamn acid does to you." And what finally happened was I was hitchhiking between Costa Mesa and Laguna, and I was hoping to score because nobody up there would give me anything. And a guy picked me up that I had used with a long time before. And this dude was wearing a suit and had a tie and a nice car, and he looked real good. And he kind of looked at me and said, "My God, what happened to you?" And then he said, I don't need to ask that. And he started telling me that there was another way to live, that I didn't have to live like this, and there was another way to go. And that way was Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was real impressed, I'll tell you. You know, I knew one other dope fiend in the whole time that I used that had cleaned up, and they had found Jesus. And they tried to sell me on Jesus, and I went out to the local church and tried to get saved, and nothing happened. I came out of there and wanted to use, you know, so. I was about as impressed with Alcoholics Anonymous and his spiel as I was with that. And he asked me where I was living, and I told him. And he went and got a couple of women from the program of Alcoholics Anonymous to come and make a 12-step call on me. And I saw those ladies coming up the walk kind of, and they looked real good, and I climbed in the closet because I thought they were going to take me away someplace. And I remember them trying to talk me out of the closet, you know, it's okay, come out. They were talking to me about Alcoholics Anonymous through this closet. And I came out and I went to some meetings. And you got to realize this was 1968 in Orange County, which is really a right-wing, very conservative area. And here I show up in this nice AA meeting, and I'm scratching, and I haven't combed the back of my hair for about 4 months, and I don't have any shoes on, and because I don't own any shoes. And I had 2 pair of pants and a couple of T-shirts, and they all had holes in them, and that, you know, and I smelled bad. And I had these. I used to jerk a lot, you know. So I'm sitting in meetings twitching and jerking, and I had a lot of petit mal seizures, and I'd have petit mal seizures in meetings, and I smelled bad and I scratched, you know. And I weigh 140 pounds today, and I'm not exactly bordering on obesity. I weighed 115 then. So they didn't really appreciate me. And I can remember it was really hard for me to talk, and I can remember one time I did talk, and afterwards a couple of ladies came up to me and told me that now that I was sober, that I should talk like a lady. And I had really cleaned up my language for them, folks. I really did. That was the best I could do. I was trying, because I knew they wouldn't appreciate it. And I slipped and slid around in AA a lot. You know, I get a little bit of time, and I just about get through the worst of the withdrawals to the point where some of your emotions start surfacing, and then I'd use again. And finally, a lady in AA came up to me after about months of this and said, you know, there's a program for people like you. And of course, I'd heard about programs for people like me. And she gave me a number of a guy in Anaheim and told me that he was active in Narcotics Anonymous and to give him a call, and I might do better there. So I called him, and he came over and he got me, and he took me to my first NA meeting. And there was something different in that NA meeting, and different from what I had experienced before. Because a lot of the people there, and there weren't very many, I got to tell you, there were about 3 or 4 meetings at the time in all of NA, in the whole of NA. There were 3 or 4 meetings. And maybe a dozen or so people would be in each of those meetings. But I really believe that those people, some of them had experienced some of the fear and some of the terror and some of the pain and some of the degradation that I had experienced. And I really felt for the first time a little bit of hope. You know, at that time I was still a lot into, yeah, I'll do it, but I want to see results. And I would really put together a little bit of time, and I wouldn't see the results that I expected to see, and I'd use again. And finally, after a few months of that, I decided that I would stay clean and I would stay sober, no matter what happened, no matter how much it hurt, that I would stay clean and I would stay sober. And I'd like to tell you that once having made that decision, And once I had already accepted the first step, that was very obvious to me. And the second step, that I was insane, was also very, very obvious. I did not have a problem with either of those. Getting beyond that, I had a problem, but not with those two. And I would really like to tell you that I got into it and everything was wonderful. And everything, my life turned around. I got into it, and I got to tell you some of the things that happened to me my first year sober. It was not wonderful, it was awful. You know, when I had about 6 weeks, I really began to feel, you know, I was terrified. I was so terrified. And in about 6 weeks or so, I started to feel a little bit comfortable in meetings, and I started to feel a little bit comfortable going out of my house. And I was in the grocery store at 6 weeks sober, and I had this attack, anxiety attack, and that was back in the days before I knew you didn't die from them. And I got this real panicky feeling, and I knew that everybody was looking at me, you know, kind of paranoid. And I felt like I had to get out of there. And I got out of there, and I got out of there with something that belonged to them, and I got busted for shoplifting. And when I came to the program, I had tickets, and I had like 9 moving violations, because, you know, who's going to pay a parking ticket when you think you're dying? Now, I'm not going to live, or who's going to pay a traffic ticket when you know you're going to die the next day? So I would just tear them up and throw them out the window. And I had to learn a lot of things. I had to learn how to work. It had been a long time since I worked, and I had to learn that when you were supposed to be there at 9 o'clock, you needed to be there at 9 o'clock and not 9:45 or 10 or 10:30. And I got fired from a number of jobs in the learning process of that. And then I had to, in the meantime, then I had to learn that, you know, when I first came around, they would talk about resentments. I would think, you know, I don't have, thank God I don't have that. I may be crazy, but I don't have that. And when I had some months sober, all the hate and all the rage that I felt all my life started coming out, and it just kept coming out and kept coming out. And I learned that you couldn't throw a stack of dishes on the floor at work, and you couldn't kick the busboy in the shins. I got fired a few times for things like that. And I finally got this job, and I was holding this job, and I really felt good about it. You know, I mean, it was the first job I'd been able to hold. And like I said, I had these 9 moving violations, and I was saving up some money to go into court and take care of them. And about the time that I hadn't quite gotten around to it, and they came and they busted me, and they hauled me right out of that restaurant on 4 of them. And I felt pretty good about that, because, you know, I thought, well, they didn't get them all. And I've only got 4 of them to deal with now. And my boss was real understanding about it. And then the next night they came back and got me out of the same restaurant for 5 more. So I lost that job. So I had to deal with that. I had to deal with the wreckage of my past from the physical standpoint. It took me about a year to just take care of that kind of wreckage. When I had when I came to Narcotics Anonymous, there were no women staying sober, and I had male sponsors, and I wouldn't recommend it, and it didn't work real great. But it was, you go with what you got, and that was all I had. And 2 really important things happened to me when I had about a year. And one of the things that happened to me was, it was a lady that had about 6 or 7 months less than I did, that was staying clean, and we kind of got together and we sponsored each other. And we read inventories to each other. And it isn't an ideal situation, but it really helped. It helped me a lot. When I say it wasn't an ideal situation, I would go over there with some big paranoid trip, and I'd lay it on her, and she'd say, yeah, the motherfuckers are really trying to get you. And she was serious. So it wasn't exactly an ideal situation, but it was working, and that was really important to me. And I had no driver's license, and I had no registration. I mean, I had no driver's license, and I wouldn't have for another 2 years. And, you know, when I came here, I had no belief in God whatsoever. And they say came to believe, and I think the beginning, it didn't really happen until I had 5 years, but the beginning of coming to believe happened at about a year. Kind of one of those little coincidences happen to you that you just know, and then later on I forgot it, but I ran into, I'm driving this old beat-up Buick that's about 20 years old. You can hear coming for 3 blocks, and it cost me $50. And I'm coming up on a stoplight, and I had a petit mal seizure, and I ran into this old man, and he was about 70 years old. And he got out of the car, and I thought I would die when I saw how old he was. Oh my God, are you in trouble? And I totaled his car, and I started crying. And I said, look, man, I don't have a driver's license, and I'm in a lot of trouble. And I'll pay you whatever you want for your car, and I can't do it right now, but I'll make payments on it. God, and even when I was saying that, it seemed like I said a lot of those things when I was using. But this time, like it really, and he said, okay. And he called me about a week later and asked me if $100 was too much. And I said, come over and get it. And he got there and he said, he said, you remind me so much of my granddaughter, and I just really feel for you. And if you're ever in any trouble or you ever need anything, this is my phone number. And I thought, God, maybe there is something. Maybe there really is. And then I forgot about it. But that was one of the things that was instrumental in the kind of belief that I have today. And when my first year came, I didn't take a cake when I had my first year because I couldn't get up. I mean, that year was so bad that I could not get up in good conscience and say how wonderful everything was. And I couldn't get up and tell you how rotten everything was either, so I didn't do anything about it. And somehow, after that first year, things started to clear up a little bit, and things started to get a little bit better. It was really very, very, very difficult for me to get close to people on this program. I wasn't a person that trusted easy, and it took me a long, long time to learn how to trust. But somehow, through my second year of sobriety, things got a lot better for me, and things began to fall into place for me. And I laid a lot of the footwork, wrote a lot of inventories, and worked a lot on myself during that year. And then between 3 and 5, those were really, really good years for me. One of the first things that I asked myself when I cleaned up, how much time do I have?
All night.
One of the first things that I asked myself when I cleaned up was, where could I make the most amount of money where they ask the least amount of questions about your background? And I decided I would be a waitress. And I made a lot of money, and I mean, by the time I had a couple of years, I had a job in a good place, and I started to get involved with people on the program, and I started to really get involved in the fellowship, and I started to get involved in a lot of other things. And throughout my entire life, I didn't know anything about me. I didn't know what I liked, and I didn't know what I didn't like. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I didn't want. And those were years of doing a lot of experimenting and trying on a lot of things. You kind of go into the shoe store and you try on shoes, and the one you don't like, you just kind of chuck them. And there were a lot of things that I did during that year. I took up some sports, and I did this, and I did that. And one of the things that I did was I got this motorcycle, and I had it chopped. Little 350 Honda with a peanut tank and a sissy bar and pull down handlebars and extensions, and it was bright pink. And for about 3 months I really liked it. And then one morning I pushed it up a hill about 8 times, starting it and going down, and decided screw it and called somebody to come and get it. That was over with. So much for that. And I played some volleyball on the beach and went to the beach every day and just did a lot of stuff and really enjoyed my sobriety. And then when I had 5 years, it was like the carpet came out from underneath me. It wasn't enough anymore. And my 5th year was probably the worst year I've ever experienced. Using was not an option for me. And I didn't really think about using that 5th year, but I thought a lot about suicide. And a good friend of mine, somebody that I really loved really deeply, who was very instrumental in my sobriety, I watched them die very slowly and very painfully of cancer. And it was like, it just was really, really I felt a lot of despair. I felt trapped in my occupation. I didn't know how to do anything else, and I didn't want to do it anymore. And I really had a bad attitude. And I looked around at the chicks that were 10 years older than I was that were working in that place, and the kind of attitude that they had, and how I was kind of falling right into that. Somebody'd leave me 50 cents, and I'd say, look, that motherfucker, son of a bitch. Jesus Christ, fucking cheapskate. And I'd say, Sally, what are you doing? And I didn't know what to do. It felt like I really had hit a wall, and I didn't know where to go, and I really, really felt trapped. And my friend died, and at this time I learned how to talk about what was bothering me, and I was talking about this to everybody. I mean, everybody that would listen. And I was moaning and groaning and whining and sniveling and carrying on, and finally somebody told me, why don't you do something? And I said, what? And they said, I don't care, just do something. Go to school, do anything. Just fucking do something. And this particular person was registering for some classes, and I went down. She had me go down with her, and she said, well, why don't you register for something? And I said it was too late. And this lady popped up and said it wasn't too late. So I ended up registering for a couple of classes, and I went. And I really realized that intellectual stimulation had been missing in my life for a long time. And I went back, and I really responded to them. I really liked it, and I went back and I signed up for 3 more, being the compulsive personality that I am. And 4 years later, I graduated from UCI with a BA degree. And I did it myself. I didn't take any government money. I really felt good about that. That was the first thing in my life that I started, that I finished. And that really, really meant a lot to me. I was a great starter, but I never finished anything. And it meant a lot to me not to, I had lived off of people, and I had lived off of places, and I had lived off of things for a long time. And it really felt good to be able to do that, because I wanted to do it and I was capable of doing it. That really meant a lot to me. And when I graduated, I took the summer off and played volleyball on the beach, and just kind of did what I was doing, and kind of talked to God about to kind of show me what to do. And somebody called and offered me a job, and I went there, and I worked there for a while, and somebody kind of called me and offered me another job someplace else. And when I took the second job, it was really a professional place, and it was way over my head, and I knew I was in deep shit as soon as I got in there and found out what kind of a place it was. And I used to go to work every day, and I'd say, okay, God, you gave this to me, you do something with it. And I really grew and developed as a result of that job. And then I was there for a while, and I got a job they moved me to a family therapist. And I had to learn, I was teaching people how to be honest about their feelings and how to talk about their feelings. And I knew a little bit, but I really didn't know what I know today as a result of being placed in that position. And I began practicing some of the stuff that the program had taught me, and that I was teaching other people to do. And my relationships with people and those close to me really improved as a result. I don't know, that a little bit kind of brings me up to today. But there's a couple of things that I really want to talk about. And about 4 years ago, a friend of mine and I went up north. to see, this guy's brother was on the tail end of a 6-year sentence at one of the local penitentiaries, and he was doing life on the installment plan. 2 years here and 4 years there and 6 years here, that sort of thing. And we went up to talk to him about Narcotics Anonymous, and he didn't have to go that way, and there was a better way to live. And when we saw him, one of the, hey, how you doing, and the dude says something to the effect, I'm doing real great. He's locked up, been locked up for 5 years. I'm doing real great. I'm getting a little Thorazine from the shrink and a little Pruno on the yard. And once in a while somebody brings in something good. I'm doing fine. And we talked a little bit about Narcotics Anonymous, and he says, hey man, you know what? Drugs are the only thing that have ever given me any relief from the pain of living, and I intend to use them till they plant me. So we were both kind of feeling a little down about this, and we were driving through this little town, and there was a Milano club over on the side. And we were staying in this little, it was in the middle of the summertime, and it was a vacation town, and we were staying in this little flea trap motel because that's the only thing we could find with the faucet dripping and the paint peeling, and it's orange, And we stopped in this Milano club, and we started talking to some people in there, and there was one guy that was in Narcotics Anonymous in that whole town. And he used to drive about 60 miles away to the nearest NA meeting. And we got to kind of rapping with him, and he said, hey, where you staying? And we told him, and he said, that's a flea trap. We said, yeah, we know. And he says, look, man, I got this yacht in the harbor, and why don't you let me put you up out there? So we stayed on this yacht, and it was really big. And this dude had never seen either one of us and didn't know us from Adam, but it was one addict reaching out to another. And believe me, there were some infinitely pawnable things on that yacht. And yet that trust and that fellowship was there. And that really, really meant something to me, because it kind of goes along with some of the things that I've experienced this year, that no matter where you go in this country today, and hopefully one day in the world, the fellowship is a dime away. All you need is a dime. Quarter? Shit. Quarter. Thank you. But really, all you need is a quarter. And in May of this year, I've been in and out of service for a long, long time. And one of the things that you find out in service is that a lot of people avoid it because of the personalities and because of the fighting. And I think that being involved in service, you learn a lot about yourself, and you learn a little patience, and you learn some tolerance. You got to, or go crazy, or get loaded, one of the two. But in May of this year, they held the end of April of this year, they held a literature conference in Santa Monica. Yeah. And I had seen a copy of the Gray Book that came out of Memphis, and I didn't like it. And I had some real strong opinions, because I'm very opinionated about that. Well, one of the things I really learned in freshman English composition was that committees can't write books. And I really believe that. But anyway, I had some opinions about that they needed some professional writers. They needed a professional writer, a professional editor, and a professional proofreader. And I did a lot of bitching and griping about it. And if my friend Bob told me, you better go down and tell him. And I wasn't anxious to do that, but we were at a regional service meeting, and Bob says, I'm going to Lit Conference, why don't you come tell him what you got to tell him? I said, okay. So we got down there, and I got inside, and I was looking around for who to tell. I wasn't quite sure who to approach with these pearls of wisdom. And somebody said, do you type? And I said, look at my fingernails, I don't type. And they said, well, can you read? So I ended up sitting on a proofreading, on an input form reading committee where input from all over the country had been sent in regarding the book. And I found out that there were a lot of people that really loved that book. And I tend to nitpick something to death. And I took a little look at that. And then I became involved in the process. And I was working a 40-hour week that week. And I would go to work and I would watch the clock till 5 o'clock. I would get off and go down to Santa Monica and work till 2 and 3 in the morning. Something happened for me at that Live conference. And I know today that committees cannot write books, but God can working through us.